We have a big case coming up in the Supreme Court, and I will tell you, that's one of the most important cases in the history of our country. Because if we don't win that case, we will be a weakened, troubled, financial mess for many, many years to come. I don't even know if survivable is a good term. And if we do, we're going to be the most powerful economic country in the world. That's why I think I'm going to go to the Supreme Court to watch it. I've not done that, and I had some pretty big cases. I think it's one of the most important cases ever brought, because we will be defenseless against the world.
All right, so this just happened. The Supreme Court, the Supreme Court just slammed the Trump administration so hard that political analysts are calling it one of the most stunning judicial beatdowns in modern American history. And I mean, come on, when the Supreme Court starts handing out financial sanctions against a sitting president's cabinet members, that's not normal. That's not something you see every day. This is wild, But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest. You can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us, be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video. So here's what went down. October 15th, 2025. The Supreme Court upheld a lower court ruling that basically said Trump's global tariff policies, the ones he's been pushing since he got back into office, are straight up illegal. Not just questionable, not just overstepping a little bit, illegal. And the court didn't just say, hey, maybe dial it back. No, they imposed sanctions, financial penalties, against administration officials who kept enforcing these tariffs even after judges told them to stop. Let that sink in for a second. The highest court in the land is punishing Trump's own people for ignoring judicial orders. When was the last time you heard about that happening? Legal experts are saying this is almost unprecedented, because it's so rare that there's barely any modern comparison. And here's the kicker. Chief Justice Roberts reportedly called the administration's behavior a grave breach of constitutional balance and judicial authority. Grave breach? Those are strong words from a guy who usually keeps things pretty measured. This isn't some partisan judge throwing shade. This is the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court saying the Trump administration crossed the line. Now, if you've been following Trump's second term at all, you know tariffs have been his thing, his bread and butter. His whole economic strategy has been built around this idea of slapping tariffs on other countries to protect American workers and bring back manufacturing jobs. America first, right? That's been the mantra. And for a while, his base loved it. Still loves it, honestly. But here's the problem. Trump's been using something called the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, IEEPA for short, to justify these tariffs. And the courts are now saying, yeah, that's not how that law works. You can't just declare an economic emergency and tax the world into submission. The appeals court ruled 7-4 that Trump exceeded statutory limits of the IEEPA. 7-4, that's not even close. And the Supreme Court just backed them up. So now Trump's entire tariff regime, the thing that's been causing inflation headaches and messing with supply chains for months, is on shaky legal ground, and the administration is scrambling. Here's where it gets even more interesting. Trump's Justice Department, just one day before the Supreme Court ruling, filed this desperate plea saying that if the tariffs get suspended, it could destroy trade negotiations and thrust America back to the brink of economic catastrophe. Economic catastrophe. They're going full doomsday language here. And honestly, can you believe this? They're trying to convince the court that ignoring the law is somehow necessary to save the economy. That's basically the argument. Yeah, we broke the rules, but if you make us stop, everything falls apart. And look, I get it. Trade policy is complicated. Tariffs can protect some industries while hurting others. There's always winners and losers. But here's the thing. We have laws, we have a constitution, and we have a system of checks and balances specifically designed to prevent any one branch of government from doing whatever it wants. That's like Civics 101. And right now, the judicial branch is telling the executive branch, you went too far. This isn't just about tariffs, though. It's about power. It's about how much authority a president actually has versus how much authority Trump thinks he has. And this has been a theme throughout both of his terms, honestly. Trump has always pushed boundaries, always tested the limits. Whether it's immigration policy, trade, executive orders, the pattern is the same. Do something bold, face legal challenges, fight it in court, and either win or lose but never really back down. But this time the Supreme Court didn't just say no, they added sanctions, financial penalties. That's a shot across the bow. That's the court saying we're not playing games anymore. Follow the law or face consequences. So why does this matter right now? Well, midterms are coming up in 2026. Trump's legal battles are piling up, In this ruling, it undercuts one of his signature policies, right as he's trying to prove his economic vision works. Inflation is still high, jobs numbers are getting shakier, and now the Supreme Court is basically telling him his main economic tool might be illegal. That's a problem, a big one. And here's what nobody's really talking about yet. This could embolden Congress to take back control of trade policy. For years, presidents have been using emergency powers to bypass Congress on tariffs. Both parties, honestly. But if the Supreme Court is drawing a line here, Congress might see an opening to reassert its authority, and that changes everything. The political implications are massive. We're talking about a direct confrontation between the executive and judicial branches. We're talking about a Supreme Court that's willing to impose personal financial consequences on government officials who defy orders. And we're talking about a president who's never been shy about fighting back against institutions he sees as obstacles. This is going to get messy, really messy, and we're just getting started. Okay, so let's dig into what actually happened here, because like the headlines are dramatic, but the details are even crazier. So first, what are these tariffs we're talking about? When Trump came back into office in January 2025, one of his first moves was to reimpose and expand tariffs on countries all over the world. China, obviously, but also Europe, Canada, Mexico, even allies. The justification was always the same: unfair trade practices, national security threats, protecting American workers from cheap foreign goods. And he used the IEEPA, this law from 1977, to do it. Now here's the thing about the IEEPA. It was designed for actual emergencies, like real crises, wars, terrorist attacks, serious national security threats that need immediate presidential action. It's not supposed to be a blanket tool for reshaping trade policy, but Trump's team argued that America's trade deficit and the decline of manufacturing jobs constitute an economic emergency, and therefore tariffs are justified under the act. The courts did not buy that argument at all. The Federal Appeals Court ruling that the Supreme Court just upheld said pretty clearly, you can't just call something an emergency to get around Congress. Trade policy is supposed to go through the legislative branch. That's in the Constitution. Article I gives Congress the power to regulate commerce with foreign nations. The president has some flexibility, sure, but declaring a perpetual economic emergency to justify unilateral tariffs, that's stretching the law way beyond what it was meant to do. And here's where it gets messy. Trump's administration didn't just disagree with the lower court rulings, they ignored them. Multiple judges issued injunctions, basically orders to stop collecting the tariffs until the legal issues were resolved. And the Trump administration kept collecting them anyway. That's contempt of court. That's what triggered the sanctions. Legal analysts are calling this extraordinary, and it is, because normally when a court tells the government to stop doing something, the government stops. Even if they appeal, even if they think the judge is wrong, you stop and you fight it through the legal system. But Trump's team took the position that the tariffs were too important to national security and economic stability to pause, so they kept going. Chief Justice Roberts apparently did not appreciate that at all. His reported comments about a grave breach of constitutional balance aren't just about the tariffs themselves, they're about the administration's refusal to respect judicial authority. And that's a much bigger deal than any individual policy dispute. So what are the sanctions exactly? The court didn't release all the details publicly yet, but sources say financial penalties were imposed on specific officials who continued enforcing the tariffs after being ordered to stop. That's personal liability. That means these aren't just fines against the government that taxpayers ultimately cover. These are penalties against individuals for defying court orders. That's harsh and it's rare, like really rare. Now, let's talk about why this matters economically. Because Trump's team isn't wrong that tariffs have consequences. They do. When you slap a tariff on foreign goods, a few things happen. First, those goods get more expensive for American consumers. That's inflation. Second, American companies that rely on imported materials, which is a lot of them, face higher costs. That also leads to inflation or job cuts. Third, other countries retaliate with their own tariffs on American exports. That hurts American farmers, manufacturers, and workers. Economists have been sounding alarms about this for months. Some studies estimate that Trump's tariffs have cost American households over $1,000 a year in higher prices. Other analysts point to slowing job growth in manufacturing, the exact sector the tariffs were supposed to help. And inflation, still stubbornly high, partly because of these tariffs. But Trump supporters see it differently. They argue that short-term pain is worth it if it forces other countries to negotiate better trade deals. They point to the tariffs as leverage. You want access to the American market? Then give us better terms. It's hardball negotiation tactics. And to be fair, some countries have come to the table, but the question is, at what cost? And is it legal? The Supreme Court just answered that second question. No, it's not legal, at least not the way Trump's been doing it. Here's what's fascinating though. This case has split people in weird ways. You'd expect it to be purely partisan, right? Trump supporters versus Trump opponents. But it's not that simple. Some conservative legal scholars, people who generally support Trump's policies, have been uncomfortable with his use of executive power on tariffs. They see it as bypassing Congress and setting a dangerous precedent. What happens when a Democratic president decides to declare a climate emergency and use the same powers to reshape the economy? Conservatives don't want that door open. On the flip side, some progressives who hate Trump's policies are also worried about the implications of the court's ruling. Because emergency powers have been used by presidents of both parties, if the court dramatically limits those powers, that could constrain future presidents on issues progressives care about. It's complicated. But in this moment, the immediate political impact is clear. Trump just suffered a major legal defeat, and not from some liberal activist judge in a blue state, from the Supreme Court, a court that includes 3 justices he appointed himself. That stings, and the timing couldn't be worse for him. Like I mentioned earlier, midterms are coming. His approval ratings have been shaky. Inflation remains a top voter concern. And now his signature economic policy, the thing he campaigned on, is being labeled illegal by the highest court in the land. That's ammunition for his opponents. Democrats are already seasoned on this. We're seeing statements from congressional leaders calling for immediate suspension of all tariffs. Demands for investigations into who in the administration defied court orders. Talk of holding officials accountable is turning into a political firestorm. And Trump, well, if you know Trump, you know he's not backing down quietly. His initial response has been defiant. Claims that the court is interfering with national security. Accusations of judicial activism. Suggestions that Congress needs to pass new laws to clarify presidential authority on trade. He's framing this as another example of the establishment trying to block his agenda. His base is eating it up. To them, this is proof that the system is rigged against Trump. The courts, the media, the bureaucracy, all working together to stop him from helping regular Americans. It reinforces the narrative that Trump is fighting for them against powerful interests. But here's the problem with that narrative in this case. The Supreme Court isn't exactly the liberal establishment. 3 Trump appointees, a conservative majority. This isn't some partisan hit job. This is a legitimate legal ruling from a court that's generally been friendly to Trump on other issues. So what happens next? Well, legally, the administration is supposed to suspend tariff collections immediately. The court ordered it. But given that they've ignored court orders before, will they actually do it? That's the billion-dollar question. If they don't, we're looking at a full-blown constitutional crisis. The executive branch in open defiance of the judicial branch. That's not something we've seen in modern America, not like this. And think about the precedent this sets. If a president can just ignore the Supreme Court, what's the point of having a Supreme Court? What's the point of having laws? The whole system depends on everyone playing by the rules, even when they don't like the rules, even when the rules are inconvenient. This is bigger than Trump. This is bigger than tariffs. This is about whether America still has a functioning system of government, where no one, not even the president, is above the law. And right now, we're about to find out the answer to that question. All right, so let's break this down into simple pieces, because there's a lot going on here, and I want to make sure we're all on the same page. Point 1, Trump's tariffs are now officially illegal, according to the Supreme Court. Not questionable, not controversial, illegal. The court sided with lower courts that said Trump exceeded his authority under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. That's the legal foundation his entire tariff strategy was built on, and it just crumbled. What does that mean practically? It means the administration is supposed to stop collecting tariffs immediately. Businesses that have been paying these extra taxes on imports should theoretically get relief. Consumers might see some price decreases, though honestly, prices rarely go down once they've gone up. But the legal authority to impose these tariffs is gone, at least for now, and this affects real people. Small businesses that import goods from overseas have been squeezed by these tariffs for months. Manufacturers who need foreign parts to build American products have been struggling with higher costs. Farmers who face retaliatory tariffs from other countries have been losing money. This ruling could provide relief to all of them. Could. We'll see if it actually does. Point 2. The Supreme Court imposed sanctions on administration officials who defy court orders. This is huge. This is the part that legal experts are calling almost unprecedented. When a court tells you to do something or stop doing something and you ignore it, there are consequences. Usually those consequences are contempt charges or fines. But direct financial sanctions against cabinet-level officials, that's rare. That's the court sending a message. And the message is clear. We don't care how important you think your policy is. We don't care if you're the president's right-hand people. Follow the law, respect judicial orders, or face personal consequences. This has implications way beyond tariffs, because it establishes, or reestablishes really, that no one is above the law, not the president, not his cabinet, no one. If the court tells you to stop, you stop, period. And here's why that matters. We've seen a gradual erosion of norms over the years. Things that used to be unthinkable, like ignoring court orders, have become almost routine. The Supreme Court is drawing a line. They're saying enough, and they're willing to back that up with real penalties. That's significant. Point 3. This is fundamentally about the balance of power in our government. The Constitution set up 3 branches for a reason: legislative, executive, judicial, each with its own role, each with the ability to check the others. That system only works if all 3 branches respect the boundaries. What the Supreme Court is saying here is Trump crossed the boundary. He took power that belongs to Congress, the power to regulate trade, and tried to wield it himself using an emergency law that doesn't actually apply. And when courts called him on it, he ignored them. That's a double violation, and the court is pushing back hard. This matters because, look, we can argue all day about whether tariffs are good or bad policy. People disagree on that. Economists disagree on that. But what we can't disagree on is whether the president has the legal authority to impose them unilaterally. And the answer, according to the Supreme Court, is no. Not like this. If Trump wants sweeping tariffs, he needs to go to Congress, convince them, get legislation passed. That's how the system is supposed to work. Using emergency powers to bypass Congress is a shortcut, and shortcuts erode the constitutional framework. And yeah, going through Congress is harder, it's slower, it requires compromise. That's the point. The founders didn't want one person to have too much power. They wanted decisions that affect the whole country to involve debate and deliberation. That's democracy. It's messy, but it's designed that way. Point 4. The political fallout from this is going to be massive. Trump's economic agenda is built on tariffs. It's not his only policy, but it's a cornerstone. And now that cornerstone is shaky. His opponents are going to hammer him on this. Every time inflation comes up, every time prices are high at the grocery store, Democrats are going to point to this ruling and say, see, even the Supreme Court said his economic plan was illegal. And Trump's going to fight back. He's going to frame this as judicial overreach. He's going to say the court is putting American workers at risk by tying his hands on trade. He's going to rally his base around the idea that the establishment, including the courts, is blocking his agenda. But here's the thing, midterms are in 2026, and voters care about results. If the economy isn't doing well, if inflation stays high, if jobs aren't growing, Trump's going to have a hard time convincing swing voters that his policies work when the Supreme Court just called them illegal. Now, let's talk about what might happen next, because this story is far from over. First scenario, the Trump administration complies with the ruling. They suspend tariff collections. They work with Congress to try to pass legislation that gives them the authority they want. This is the play by the rules option. It's also the least likely based on Trump's track record, but it's possible. If this happens, it would actually be healthy for our democracy. It would show that the system works, that checks and balances function, that even a strong president respects the rule of law. But again, given everything we've seen, don't hold your breath. Second scenario, the administration finds a workaround. Maybe they argue that certain tariffs fall under different legal authority. Maybe they try to reframe the justification. Maybe they get creative with executive orders. Trump's team is good at finding loopholes, so don't be surprised if they try to keep some version of the tariff regime in place. This is probably the most likely outcome. Trump won't completely defy the court, but he won't fully comply either. He'll find some middle ground that lets him claim he's following the law while still pursuing his goals. It'll lead to more legal battles, more court cases, more uncertainty, but it avoids an outright constitutional crisis. Third scenario, the administration openly defies the court. They keep collecting tariffs. They argue that national security requires it and that the judicial branch can't interfere. This would be a constitutional crisis. Full stop. It would trigger impeachment discussions. It would dominate every news cycle. It would be chaos. This is the nightmare scenario, because if the executive branch can just ignore the Supreme Court, the whole system breaks down. Congress would be forced to act. Republicans would be in an impossible position. Do they stand with Trump and defend defying the court, or do they break with him and face the wrath of his base? It would tear the party apart. My guess? We'll see some combination of scenarios 2 and 3, some compliance, some defiance, and a lot of legal maneuvering. Because Trump doesn't back down, that's not his style, but he also can't completely ignore the Supreme Court without triggering consequences. Even his own party can't defend. Congress is going to play a big role here too. Republicans control both chambers right now, but this ruling puts them in a tough spot. Do they back Trump and risk looking like they support defying the courts, or do they distance themselves and risk alienating his base? It's a no-win situation for a lot of them. Some Republicans are already signaling that they think Trump should work with Congress on this. They're trying to thread the needle, support his goals, but do it the right way. Give him the legislative authority he needs. That way they can back him without looking like they're endorsing lawlessness. Democrats, obviously, are going to push for strict enforcement of the ruling, investigations into who defied court orders, legislation to limit presidential power on tariffs. They see this as an opportunity to paint Trump as lawless and constrain his power going forward. And the American people, honestly, Most people aren't going to follow the legal details. What they'll notice is whether prices go down, whether their jobs are secure, whether the economy feels stable. That's what matters in their daily lives. The constitutional stuff is important, obviously, but it's abstract for a lot of voters. So here's the bottom line. The Supreme Court just delivered one of the most significant rebukes to a sitting president in decades. They said his tariff policy is illegal. They sanctioned his officials for defying court orders, and they reestablished the principle that the president, even Trump, has limits. This isn't just a policy dispute. This is about the rule of law, about checks and balances, about whether our constitutional system still functions the way it's supposed to. And look, wherever you stand on Trump, whatever you think about tariffs, this moment matters. Because if a president can ignore the courts with no real consequences, the system breaks down, and nobody should want that. Not Republicans, not Democrats, nobody. The question now is what comes next. Does Trump comply? Does he find a workaround? Does he openly defy the court? And how does Congress respond? How do voters respond? This is going to shape the rest of Trump's time in office and potentially the 2026 midterms. So we'll be watching to see what happens next. Does Trump comply? Does he fight? Does Congress step in? And ultimately, how do voters respond when midterms roll around? This story is just getting started, and trust me, it's going to get messier before it gets clearer. The battle between Trump and the courts has been brewing for a while now, but this takes it to a whole new level. Financial sanctions, direct confrontation, constitutional questions. This is the kind of stuff that ends up in history books, and we're living through it right now. So pay attention, because what happens in the next few weeks and months is going to matter, not just for Trump, not just for his administration, but for the future of American democracy and the rule of law. Stay tuned.